Hey everyone, welcome to part one of three of the eviction conversation series. I'm talking with Caleb Cossick, who is an organizer from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, about the issue of evictions during COVID, and it was a really great conversation. So I hope that there's a lot that you can take from it. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Thank you. Hey Caleb, thank you for taking some time to talk to me about some things that have been going on in the midst of this pandemic. I appreciate you for being here with me. But before we kind of jump into all of these different topics and questions that I have for you, I think it's important to know first, who are you, Caleb?
So my name's Caleb Cossick. I have been volunteering with Greater Harrisburg Tenants United here in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania for about 8 or 9 months now. We've been doing a lot of what I would call eviction prevention and diversion work. We've been tracking eviction data and doing a lot of work to inform tenants about their rights during the pandemic. That's the majority of what we've been doing since especially September, when the moratorium on eviction expired in the state of PA.
Wow, and so what has that work been like for you?
It's like we always say it's like catching a runaway train because there's a series of deadlines. There's a series of actions that take place in eviction, and these things are constantly happening. The wheel keeps turning every single day, every single week. People are being brought to court. People are having notices put on their door, and people are being actually evicted. Despite the notion that many have that evictions are not happening, it is harder for them to happen. But almost every eviction that could happen, that gets filed, could technically happen if certain actions aren't taken. And so we're trying to catch those cases, catch those people, sometimes literally in front of a courthouse, and tell them their rights as quickly as possible, get to the next person. So it's very stressful. We know what's at stake, which is just people's health and safety, and even potentially their life. So it's pretty heavy work. It's pretty stressful work, but it's very, very rewarding, I've found, for myself.
Wow. And so what I'm hearing there is it sounds like you are a safeguard between people literally living on the streets during a pandemic, and staying in their home where they can remain safe. Would that be a correct characterization?
To the extent that being a messenger or an advocate can do that, yes. At the end of the day, they have to take the action. They have to sign the paperwork. They have to call the landlord or speak with them. We don't do mediation, so we don't call landlords and try to convince them not to evict people. There are people we work with that may do that. So there is a slight difference between the sort of advocacy or education we do and the mediation or legal counsel. We don't do those sides, but it is very much trying to safeguard people, trying to inform them and empower them to take the actions to basically speak up for their rights.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing that work. Much needed. And so what is your role? Like, what do you all do to make sure that people don't end up on the streets?
So like I said, we track eviction data. We see the cases as they're filed in our system, and we go to the courthouse on dates when there are a lot of hearings happening, say 20 hearings happening, set up a table, bring paperwork, literally flag down tenants as they enter the courthouse and say, hey, are you here for a hearing with your landlord? If so, did you know about the CDC Declaration? And that's the number one thing we do education around. It is a piece of paper that was put out by the Center for Disease Control that if a tenant meets very sort of loose requirements on having fallen behind on rent, sign it, date it, present it to the landlord, they cannot be evicted now until January 31st. The deadline was December 31st, but it was extended a month recently in the new, appropriation bill that the president just signed. So the biggest thing is letting people know about that CDC declaration is basically what we're doing to help.
I just want to backtrack for a second. So just to be clear, you all show up the date of the eviction hearing to let these people know for the first time that they're protected against eviction?
Yeah, I would say one or probably like 3 in 5 tenants that we flagged down outside the courthouse don't know anything about it yet. In the past, they're like, wait, what is that? I'm protected from eviction. And we've had people literally, we hand it to them outside. They come outside. One of the first people we actually did this with, They're like, thank you so much. I was already packing my stuff up. I was ready to go. Now I got another month. Thank you. You know what I mean? And we didn't write the law. We're just telling people what the law is, and no one else is telling them. You don't see billboards about the CDC Declaration. You don't see, in magazines or on social media, like we have to go to the courthouse and tell people about it because their landlord isn't going to tell them. That would be, some landlords will, but many landlords, that would be a bad move. That's not tactical. That's not going to get in their mind, get them the money that they want. So it comes down to concerned citizens, basically volunteers like ourselves.
Wow, that is insane. One of the bedrocks of law itself is that it should be well promulgated. When you're driving down a highway, there's a reason that the speed limit signs are every so often as you travel along the highway, because how do you follow the law if you don't know the law? So, wow, that's really amazing to me. It seems like the CDC would do something like send out a letter or something along those lines. Do you know of any way that the CDC has been making people aware of this?
The news talks about it somewhat. When it was first issued on September 4th, I'm sure the major news outlets probably ran, maybe they wouldn't be front page stories because there's so much else happening this year. You know what I mean? You got the COVID case counts, whatever the president's doing, front page, a lot of this stuff's going to fall behind. So unless you have a vested interest in, avoiding eviction, you might look this up on the internet, or you might have been lucky enough to see it on the news. There are no mailers being sent out by the county to tenants who are facing eviction. That's what we've kind of pushed for, is why don't the courthouses include a letter when they post the eviction notice on the tenant's door that says, here's a form that you can fill out to remain in your home during this pandemic. But no, they would consider that tampering in the process, and they would consider that unfair to the landlord's interest. You know what? Because in a lot of ways, the courts and constables are sort of a one-stop service operation for landlords who want to evict tenants. That's sort of my opinion, is that they're definitely not there to serve tenants. In my opinion, they're there to serve the interest of a landlord who wants to get a person out of their unit so they can put someone else in it.
Wow. And well, Caleb, I want to change gears here really quick, because I'm curious of this. What types of people are you encountering? What are the people like that are being evicted?
All over the board, but if I had to go with, statistics of my observations, probably a good half of them are women of color, many moms, many single moms, many working single moms who have been laid off. I've talked to a lot of folks that worked in warehouses that were laid off, worked in food service, servers that were laid off, or elder care and in healthcare types of situations, folks who were, asked to work in sort of dangerous scenarios, or their doctors told them, you have asthma, you really shouldn't, be going to work right now. That's a lot of the stories that I hear on a regular basis, because we do run a hotline also, and I'll take the calls on that on certain days. And that's when you get people's more in-depth stories. There are elderly folks, some younger folks, but the folks that really seem to be in trouble a lot are single moms of color. And I think there's so many responsibilities they already have, maybe caring for parents, maybe caring for, older children as well. And those are kind of the toughest stories to hear, because these are the people that are bearing all the burden before the pandemic. And now, this extra burden is just more than what they can hold, so.
Yeah, and that's just really disheartening to hear. I think that regardless of where your stance is on COVID-19, the fact of the matter is a large portion of our country shut down earlier this year and never reopened. And so who do we blame for that? We certainly shouldn't hold working class people accountable for that. And that just seems somewhat unfair of a standard to expect people to still meet their obligations, like paying the rent or paying their mortgage, when they're not even allowed to work, or it's not safe for them to work. Well, one question I have as a follow-up is that the majority reason that you've seen that people are being evicted? Is it for lack of payment, or are you seeing other reasons, for example, like being some type of nuisance, or is that sometimes used as an excuse? What are you seeing?
That would be what I would say. The majority of the cases are folks that have fallen behind on rent. It's very rare for me to talk to somebody who isn't being pursued for rent. You know what I mean? Who they're like, oh, I don't want any money from you. It usually starts with an issue with rent. And then if the landlord realizes that, well, I can't get the tenants out of the house to get a paying tenant in unless I evict them, unless I get them out. So I need to figure out a way to bypass the CDC declaration. And it is actually not hard to bypass if you are able to claim that the lease was violated. So we've had people that were brought to court on lease violation because they used profanity towards the staff at some point, or there'll be claims of like fraud that if they, called a contractor to do some repairs that the landlord hadn't done. If the landlord didn't authorize that, they can claim that there was something fraudulent that happened. There's a lot of just little loopholes, and those are the most frustrating cases because you basically have to tell someone, well, they outplayed you in this like chess game of the legal system. They claimed your lease was violated. You didn't show up to court because you probably had to go to work. So you weren't able to give your side of the story, and the judge just bought their accusation, gave them possession of your unit based on the lease violation, and now the CDC declaration isn't going to work for you. Those are the hardest situations to deal with. And my critique of the CDC declaration is just that it only covers eviction for non-payment of rent, not expiration of your lease, for instance. It's not your fault if you signed your lease, December of 2019. Well, guess what? Your lease is expiring now, and if the landlord chooses not to renew it, they can get around this CDC declaration and put you out anyway.
Wow, that's completely insane. I actually had never considered that aspect of it, because all leases have end dates. So
Yeah.
I never even considered that. It's remarkably troubling.
Yes.
But I want to switch gears once again. I want to jump over to the other side of this issue, and talk about the landlords that are pursuing these evictions. Are you seeing, is it one landlord in particular that's being especially aggressive? Is it many? Is it most? What are you seeing?
So we do track all the evictions that are filed in Dauphin County. We're able to, group those by the landlord who's filed. The largest filers are property management companies and apartment complexes. So there are companies that will be the middleman between the homeowner and the tenant, and they're basically a management company. One of the services they provide is eviction services. So based on their policy, they will pursue eviction pretty aggressively because they really need to get their money because they're actually just a middleman. So most of the money goes to the landlord, and they just take a small cut off the top. So they're very aggressive, the management companies. The other aggressive parties are the apartment complexes. And so these are sort of corporate complexes. I'm not worried about name dropping Morgan Properties. They own Lakewood Hills, Eagles Crest, Kings Manor, Wedgwood Hills, many of these really large complexes in Susquehanna, Lower Paxton Townships. They pursue eviction basically as corporate policy. So you can be a week or two late on rent. You'll get an auto-generated letter saying if you don't pay up on your rent, you're going to be brought to court in the next week. You know what I mean? So we've had people that have been brought to court over and over and over again, as many as 3 times since September, because they just haven't been able to catch up on their rent. And there's no personalized, like, let's have a conversation about this. It's just, we'll file again every month. And every time you get filed against, you get $150 in court fees. So at this point, there's people who have racked up something like nearly $500 in court fees just because the corporate policy of their complex where they live is to continue evicting as many times as legally possible. So those are the most sort of egregious sort of actors. There are also what you would call like the slumlord landlords who do pursue eviction pretty aggressively. But for instance, the largest evictor, one of the property management companies, has gone for something like 180 to 200 households so far since September. So that's the idea you get. There'd be smaller landlords, maybe 10, 15 households, and those could be individual people. But in many cases, it's not just some guy, it's a corporation or a large company with a vested interest in maximizing their profit. And that's where a lot of this aggressive eviction occurs, and sort of almost machine-like policy eviction.
Wow. Well, one thing that is not surprising to hear is that corporations are hurting working class people.
Yeah.
What's surprising to hear is that they're doing it so aggressively and so heartlessly in the midst of a pandemic. Maybe that's not so surprising to some. I want to backtrack and just make sure I understand this correctly. This company, this is just one of these corporations. I think you said there are a few of them, but Morgan Properties,
Mhm.
they will send people back to court over and over again to rack up that court fee.
Yes.
Um, do you know of any consequences for lack of payment? Because we're talking about people who are struggling, obviously, financially. So if they're racking up $150 every month throughout the course of this pandemic, whenever it's safe to return to normal life again, that could be a lot of money. So do you know if there's consequences for lack of payment, or if that could end up hurting that person even further?
Well, every single one of those evictions ends up on their credit record. So that's really bad. I've talked to tenants who have been evicted from a Morgan Properties complex, then really, really struggle to find the next step because they have an eviction or two in the last 6 months on their record. And you really have to go to a private landlord in that case. As far as the debt, it will just keep piling up. And the CDC declaration eventually will expire. And when it does, the tenant's liable for that whole mountain of debt. You know what I mean? And that includes late fees too, because they're also tacking on decent late fees every month, in addition to the court fees that pile up and obviously the back rent. So if another round of rental assistance, if more unemployment compensation, if a new job that you feel safe going to doesn't occur for a lot of these families, they're just buying time with the CDC declaration. They could be, 3 months late in rent, but effectively 4 to 5 months in debt by the end of all this because of all these court fees, late fees, et cetera. And when the CDC declaration expires, like that's it, they will be evicted. And that's sort of the outcome that we need to prevent with some sort of rent forgiveness, or what I would call it almost a renter debt bailout. We bail out corporations all the time. Why don't we bail out the people who have been unable to pay their rent? The landlords get what they want. We all know what they want. The tenants are able to be safe and get out from under a mountain of debt. Now, rental assistance programs, which do occur and have been slated with this appropriations bill, promise to sort of meet that need. So we're just hoping that the rental assistance forthcoming in Dauphin County is very accessible to all the working class families who are buried under mountains of debt and really just clinging to this declaration as their only protection from being put out and into a hostile, market where it's going to be really hard for them to find a new place. You'll have a mad rush for the few private landlords that will house people who have all these evictions on their records. So it's we're not out of the woods yet by a long shot. It's going to take a lot to solve this. I just call it a debt crisis. I think that's a pretty reasonable way to describe it. It's a renter debt crisis. So
Wow. Yeah, it seems like we're as a society, we're allowing the working class to end up in perpetual debt by no doing of their own. Um, and you're talking about working class people. These are not people who are excessively impoverished, or people who are excessively misfortuned. These are people like you and me, it seems like. And this is happening to them in our backyards, which seems really wrong. So why hasn't our government given us protection beyond January 31st? Do you have any understanding there? Is there any hope on the horizon for people to feel some sense of comfort?
the tactic they use is like kicking the can. So they'll give you another few months at a time. That's what they've done on the federal level. The city of Harrisburg has enacted a moratorium on eviction that gets extended month to month. So it's due to expire on the 15th of January. We're sort of meeting and lobbying with the mayor to try to tell him you got to keep extending this month over month. But they would never just pass a bill that says no evictions until September of 2021, and here's a pile of money to solve this debt crisis moving forward right here today. That doesn't seem to be the tactic. And all I can really say is that there's a very strong lobby for private interests, for landlord interests, and for the business interests who would we don't want to just give everybody money because then they won't come work for us. And like that lobby is real. It exists. Those interest groups exist. And the, conservative state senators, House representatives, that's the constituents they represent. So those are the people that they advocate for in their policies. The compromises that have to occur, like with this appropriations bill, are never in the favor of working people. They never are. They're very clearly in the favor of, you could say they're in the favor of small business owners, but again, the landlord with 25, 30 properties who chooses to evict 5 or 6 of them, that's a small business owner. You know what I mean? Like it or not, the minority is favored over the majority by many of the politicians in power. So lobbying those people who could have some sensitivity to it, or maybe are just their heads buried in the sand, trying to let them know how serious this threat is to regular folks. It is very important. More important to me, I think, is those regular folks starting to talk to each other and associate with each other and try to build some power for themselves that politicians can't take. You know what I mean? That they're not at the mercy of these inefficient or inadequate measures, just kicking the can down the road another month. Tenants have to organize, I think. And in the complexes, that is a place where they can. And we are kind of trying to work to try to build associations in some of those complexes. It is slow going because it's not a familiar concept to a lot of tenants to form an association, have a monthly meeting, come together with some demands and try to get into some degree of struggle with the landlord, the management company, really, to improve their lot, try to win a better future for themselves and their families.
Yeah. Well, I want to touch on that more in a moment. But something that seems natural almost is to say, well, and some of these places where people are being evicted, if you look on the court dockets online, these are Republican areas with Republican elected judges who are probably overseeing these cases. But you mentioned the mayor a moment ago, Mayor of Harrisburg, Eric Pappenfuss. He's a Democrat elected official, but he's also a landlord himself. And so, are you seeing that there's just maybe a lack of empathy in general from all elected officials who have power in this situation, regardless of party, regardless of race?
I do see folks who lack empathy. I see folks who feel the need to process everything through a sort of economic lens of well, how will it be sustainable if we just pay people's rent? Blah, blah, blah. People won't want to work. They're spending their, rental assistance money on video games and toys for the kids for Christmas, blah, blah, blah. I hear these arguments and I associate them with a sort of austerity attitude towards society and the government that, oh, you can't give people too much. They'll just get lazy and complacent. We need, and to me, it's they're tired arguments. These are the Reagan Thatcher arguments that we're still recycling. And this is not 1983. This is 2020 and we're in the middle of a pandemic. We need to make rental assistance accessible. We need to make rent forgiveness a possibility. Because people really are trying, you know what I mean? It is not easy to get by with kids also taking care of parents, also taking care of adult kids. A few number of people are shouldering a lot of the burden in certain communities, and people need to be supported. The least they can be offered is fair and affordable housing, secure housing during a pandemic. That is the least that people can be offered. So I really just ask people to quit looking at everything through this economic lens and just show some compassion. I do think it's hard for people. They think they're being pragmatic when they're kind of just being heartless. And I think being in the professional business environment, getting to be a landlord who also then runs for mayor, there is a certain attitude there from the start if you're a business person. People say a business person should run our government because isn't our government a business? Well, no, it's not a business. Businesses exist to create profit. I'm sorry, but is what they do first and foremost. If that's not your main intention, you're not a good business person. So governments exist to serve the people who elect them, and that includes public health, safety, and that could mean bad business or bad business practices to certain extents, especially during a pandemic. That's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I agree with you there about the purpose of government. Our government is not a business. It's not here to generate profit or, in a governmental sense, revenue.
Right.
Revenue is generated to support us further. Our taxpayer dollars go into the government so that they can do things for us, not vice versa.
Right. We have to say what those needs are, and those needs should be met. And if people believe their voices actually would be heard and respected, you would actually see that outpouring of we need help, we need money, we need to get through to the next month. People don't even trust the government enough to even ask for that. They know the score. They know that the people with the deepest pockets have the power, and we're cynical in this day and age because of that attitude that everything just comes down to the dollar, and it's kind of sick. So
Yeah, and I can see that it troubles you just to even work through it.
yeah.
But I have a question, for the people, and I can picture it almost, that Reaganite type thinker, where they have adopted that pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality so much that in 2020, a year that's so unprecedented, so challenging, that we've seen things that we've never seen before and might never see again. And they still hold on to that mentality. They still say, well, you can get through it. You can be strong enough to get through and push through. And as a result of that, they lack empathy towards people who are struggling right now. What do you say to that person? How do you convince them to have compassion? And how do you convince them that taking care of your neighbors is actually in the best interest for our society as a whole?
It's a hard sell. I mean, I think talking to people and really understanding their situation is the only way to get to that point of empathy. You have to look at your own experience, look at the points in your life that were low points, and try to determine what were the real factors that played into those struggles that I've gone through. And I think if people are honest with themselves, they'll realize that, situations where you're lacking the resources to meet your basic needs, the stress and the anxiety and the fear that's associated with that are crippling. And when you have safety nets, when you have, comfortable folks in your family to fall back on, that makes a world of difference when you're in that state. Intergenerational poverty is extremely real. Being the only person in your family who's really able to pay rent and having, 5 or 6, 7, 8 other people who depend on you to keep a roof over their head to some extent, whether it's a little help every month, like that is a very real and normal situation for people to be in. But without that intergenerational poverty piece, you're never going to understand that until you form a relationship with a person who's dealing with that, form some level of trust. You're going to really struggle because you come from a world where everybody's more or less comfortable. They might be living paycheck to paycheck, working pretty hard to pay the rent, but they are not a person responsible for an actual extended community of people who are poor, have been poor, and unfortunately probably will be poor for years to come, and who really just want the basics, want to feel safe, want to feel secure. And the lack of that puts them in a constant state of anxiety, a constant state of anger, frustration. It's getting in touch with the bad emotions, I think, that creates that empathy, getting in touch with fear, honestly, and being real about that. And when you can be real about that, hopefully it doesn't create a hardness inside of you. It would be able to create an empathy. And I think that that's what our society needs is to respect, honestly, that fear that people live in every single day. Because they do. I talk to them. So it's disturbing, but it's real.
Yeah, that might have been far-fetched 4 years ago, but fear is a large part of our politics today. So I think that might not be so foreign for people to grasp. I do want to say something to anyone who's watching this at home right now, hopefully at home. I do want to say Think of a time where you were low, as Caleb just suggested. Think of a time where you were struggling, and really be honest with yourself. Did you get through that time to get to where you are now alone? Or did you have some help? Did you have someone who supported you at the very least? Did you have someone who helped push you to the next step so that you can move on to where you are now? Think about that. Think about that honestly. If you did have someone who supported you, if you did have someone who had help, think about others who may not have had someone like that or who do not have someone like that currently. And why should we deny them that same simple comfort? That's my question to anyone watching this at home right now. I hope that we can have compassion for each other, especially in moments when we need to most have compassion for our neighbors. No one put themselves in this position right now. No one created COVID. Okay, we are in this position by no doing of our own, and we should look out for our neighbors. We should take care of our neighbors. And so moving forward, Caleb, to close us out, I think it would be important to answer two questions to end this. First of all, to people who are facing eviction right now, who are struggling right now, what can they do?
If they're facing eviction, we always recommend that if they don't know what their rights are, they learn those rights. They can call our hotline because we do run that. I don't have the number up in front of me, but I'll grab it quickly. It is, oh, here it is, 717-461-2096. We try to answer every single call that comes in. We might not answer it in real time, but you do need to know what your rights are. You need to know if you're protected by the CDC Declaration or the Harrisburg City eviction ban. You need to stay up to date on rental assistance, on the state or county level as it comes out. There should be more in January. There's a level of diligence that can make all the difference if you are facing eviction. Believing that it can't happen to you is not a good policy. I've talked to people who have been locked out. They didn't even think it was possible. Responding to that anxiety with avoiding the problem is not going to pan out. So I encourage people to reach out, and that's why we run this hotline. But also, just ask your neighbors, ask whoever it is out there that would have a vested interest in your safety.
Thank you so much, Caleb. And my final question before we end here is to the people out there that are now watching this and thinking, oh my God, I didn't know this was going on. What can they do now to become involved and to help protect their neighbors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a number of things that folks like that could do. There are people they could donate to. If we're talking about Dauphin County here, there's the Center for Peace and Justice. We try to funnel people towards them for donations because they work directly with tenants who are facing eviction to appeal their evictions, pay some of the back rent or bond requirements to make that. So there's a place for people that want to make donations. There's a place for people that want to run the GHTU hotline. If you're a caseworker or like to talk to people, we would love to talk to you because we're the ones unbelievably sort of involved in this front line of talking to people who don't know their rights. There aren't a lot of lawyers in Dauphin County to represent tenants. There are a few, and they work very hard. So yeah, we really need all the help we can get. Our website is harrisburgtenants.org. You can check out that website or find Greater Harrisburg Tenants United on Facebook. Shoot us a message if you're interested in, working with this hotline or doing some of the tabling. We've sort of retired it for now because of how cold it is, but we probably will have to be doing it again in January. We had like 150 evictions filed since December 21st in the county. So it's picking up again, actually. So yeah, just look us up, harrisburgtenants.org, Greater Harrisburg Tenants United on Facebook, Tenants Unite HBG on Instagram. So if you're in Dauphin County, we'd love to work with you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Caleb. And I think the headline to close this off with 150 evictions filed the week of Christmas.
Yes. Yes. I think looked at the data.
That's insane. I think that's a good way to close this off. If you don't think that this is a massive problem right now, then I don't know what you were listening to this entire time. Thank you so much, Caleb. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe, share with friends. Also, you can find People's Podium News on Instagram under the same name, at People's Podium News. I look forward to catching up with y'all next time. Thanks, Caleb.
Yep. Thank you, Dom. Have a good rest of your day.